A chip is a city of transistors, too small to see. It is also a rock. On August 25, 2026, Apple announces the M6, its first 2-nanometer processor, and the world stares at Cupertino, at nanometers, at machines that think. The headline is silicon. The bottleneck is not. Hundreds of miles from any foundry, in Mitchell County, North Carolina, a town of a little more than 2,000 people sits on a seam of quartz so clean that the semiconductor industry has never found a true replacement. Spruce pine does not etch circuits. It does not run a stock exchange. It supplies the material that becomes the crucible, that holds the melt, that becomes the wafer, that becomes the chip. Roughly 90% of the ultra-high purity quartz required for those crucibles comes from this one deposit. That is not a slogan. It is a supply chain with a zip code. If the mountain stops, the 2-nanometer line does not slow. It waits. The contradiction is almost insulting. A trillion-dollar industry of clean rooms, extreme ultraviolet scanners, and sovereign industrial policy is tied to a handful of pits in the Blue Ridge. Public maps of chip power run through Taiwan, Arizona, and Korea.
The private map runs down a 2-lane road in Appalachia. This is not a story about a smaller transistor. It is a story about a rock that refuses to be copied, a town almost nobody can find, and a choke point no statute can legislate away. The digital age still has to pass through a furnace. The furnace still has to pass through quartz, and the quartz still has to come from here.
Long before anyone needed a transistor, Spruce pine was a mica town. In the 19th century, miners followed sheets of muscovite into the hills for stove windows and electrical insulation. Feldspar came next, ground into glaze for toilets and dinner plates. Quartz was the leftover, the white waste in a district famous for other minerals. The deposit itself is an Alaskite pegmatite, a coarse granite body that cooled with unusual patience when the ancestral Appalachians rose. Dates put the spruce pine plutons near 380 million years ago. What matters is not the romance of deep time. What matters is what the slow cooling left out. Most quartz in the world is dirty in ways the eye cannot see. Aluminum, lithium, iron, titanium, boron, and phosphorus sit inside the crystal lattice in parts per million. For a window or a countertop, that is nothing. For a vessel that will hold molten silicon at 1,414 degrees Celsius, those parts per million are poison. In 1916, Jan Czochralski, a Polish chemist, pulls a metal filament from a melt and notices a thread of crystal following it.
The method that still grows almost every monocrystalline silicon boule for advanced logic is already there, decades before Bell Labs. By the 1950s and 1960s, as Fairchild and Texas Instruments and Intel turn silicon into a product, the industry needs a container that will not donate atoms into the melt. Graphite contaminates. Ordinary glass melts. Platinum is impossible at that volume. Fused quartz, silica glass made from the purest natural quartz, becomes the answer. The crucible must survive weeks of rotation and heat. It must not shed boron that would dope the ingot. It must not crack when a 300-millimeter crystal, heavier than a man, is pulled from the liquid. Through the 1970s and 1980s, Uniman, working the Spruce Pine District, learns that this particular pegmatite can be beneficiated into a grade the rest of the planet cannot match. The product line later known as Iota is not a brand in the consumer sense. It is a specification. Iota STD, then Iota 4, Iota 6, Iota 8. Each step a war against alkali metals and transition metals. Crucible makers, many of them in Japan, fuse the sand into vessels. Silicon producers drop polysilicon chunks into those vessels, melt them, seed them, and pull boules that will be sliced, polished, and shipped to foundries. Every node the public celebrates still begins with that melt. Every attempt to treat quartz as a commodity collides with the same geology. Other sands exist. Other mines exist. The lattice chemistry of spruce pine does not. The town remains small. The trucks remain ordinary. The wafers get denser. The rock does not get a press conference. Two names sit on the district like locked gates:
Sibelco, a privately held Belgian minerals group based near Antwerp, controls the historic Unimin high-purity quartz operation and the iota grades that Crucible plants specify by habit. The Quartz Corp, a joint venture of France's Imerys and Norway's Norsk Mineral, works the same mountain chain and also runs a site at Drag in Nordland as a second source that still cannot fully displace the Carolina rock. Neither company is a household word. Neither needs to be. Their customers are not shoppers. Their customers are a short list of fused quartz specialists and crystal growers who will reject a lot for a few parts per million. The work after the blast is chemistry as much as mining. Ore is crushed, floated, leached with acids, passed under magnets, heated, washed, classified. The recipes are trade secrets in the old sense, not a conspiracy, a process that took decades and that no annual report is obliged to publish. Visitors are not welcome in the finishing halls. Analysts who cover TSMC do not tour Mitchell County. That silence is an incentive, not a personality.
If a rival deposit could be qualified to the same electrical specification, the rent on this mountain would fall. If the exact impurity map of each bench were public, a chemist in another country would know what to hunt. So the companies speak in grades and tons, not in coordinates. Downstream, Japanese and European crucible houses turn the sand into glass. Shinetsu, Toso, and a handful of others live on yield. A failed crucible can kill a bull worth tens of thousands of dollars before a single lithography step. Upstream, Sibelco and the Quartz Corp live on exclusion. Their motive is not to run the chip industry. Their motive is to remain the only rock the chip industry can trust at the highest purity. Apple, TSMC, Samsung, Intel never sign a quartz lease. They buy wafers from partners, who buy crystals from growers, who buy crucibles from glassmakers, who buy sand from these pits. The power is contractual and geological at once. A private rule set, spec sheets, qualification lots, multi-year offtake, does the work that a government monopoly would do without ever appearing on a ballot. Ambition here looks like a laboratory that will not give tours.
Obsession looks like a milligram of aluminum. The industry keeps telling itself that materials can be engineered. Then it meets the mountain. China produces vast tonnages of quartz for solar crucibles, where a looser impurity budget is survivable because a solar cell can tolerate dopant levels that would ruin a logic wafer. Those tons do not automatically become electronic-grade feed. Qualification for a leading-edge Chorolsky shop is a years-long torture test. Leach rates at temperature, bubble content, lifetime of the vessel, metal contamination in the first wafers off a new boule. A mine can be large and still fail. Brazil has quartz. Russia has quartz in the Urals. India has quartz. Norway's drag operation is real, and the Quartz Corp uses it, yet buyers still treat the Carolina grades as the reference standard for the most demanding crucibles. Synthetic silica, grown by chemical vapor or hydrothermal methods, already serves oscillator crystals and optics. Scaling that chemistry into the mass, diameter, and cost of a 300mm melt vessel has never displaced the natural powder at the volume the foundries require. Price is one barrier. Defect physics is another. A synthetic route that works in a lab can still seed bubbles that burst a crucible at 1400 degrees. Each time wafer diameters grew, 150 millimeters, 200, 300, the crucible had to grow with them. A larger vessel means more wall area in contact with the melt, more time at temperature, less forgiveness for a stray alkali. The move to extreme ultraviolet lithography and to gate-all-around transistors does not relax that demand. It tightens it, because a contaminated boule wastes a more expensive process. Governments notice chips. They pass statutes. The CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 commits tens of billions of dollars to American fabrication plants. None of that money creates a second Spruce Pine. A fab in Arizona still needs a Japanese crucible that still needs Carolina sand. Inventory can buffer a week. It cannot buffer a geology. In late September 2024, Hurricane Helene crosses Florida and dies over the southern Appalachians as a rain engine. Western North Carolina is not supposed to flood like a delta. It does. The North Toe River and its creeks leave their banks. Bridges on US 19E and the local spurs that serve the mines drop into the water. Spruce Pine streets fill with mud. Power dies.
Rail and truck routes that carry ore and finished quartz stop. The Quartz Corp and Sibelco halt or throttle operations. For a stretch of days that feels longer in a just-in-time industry, the world's most advanced manufacturing stack stares at a washed-out two-lane. Trade press that usually argues about EUV uptime begins to ask how long Crucible makers can run on stockpiles. There is no secondary auction for iota-equivalent sand. There is no wartime substitute sitting in a strategic petroleum reserve of quartz. The companies repair, roads reopen, production returns. The wound is the proof, not the outage length. A single storm, not a sanction and not a war, was enough to put a hand on the pipe. Imagine a longer closure, a slope failure, a plant fire, a contamination event that forces a year of requalification. No one has to bomb a fab in Taiwan to slow the node. They only have to stop a mill in Mitchell County. Beijing understands this, even if talk shows do not. So do Tokyo and Seoul, whose crucible and crystal firms sit one step downstream. So does Washington, which can subsidize clean rooms and still not move a pegmatite.
The quiet geopolitical fact is not that North Carolina governs the chip trade. It is that a Belgian private group and a Franco-Norwegian venture operating under American property law on a deposit no ministry designed sit under the entire stack. Export controls on lithography tools make headlines. A washed-out culvert does not. Yet the culvert is the more honest map. Foundries talk about resilience in paired plants and second sources. At this layer, there is no paired plant with equal purity. Second sources exist on paper and in solar yards. They do not exist at scale for the last few parts per billion. The climax does not look like a boardroom betrayal. It looks like brown water over a loading dock, a closed gate, and a specification sheet that will not accept a substitute. And then the trucks roll again, and the industry pretends the lesson was weather. The lesson was monopoly by accident of cooling magma. The next failure will not need a hurricane. It will only need the grade to drift, the workforce to thin, or a buyer to discover that a qualified lot was the last of its kind for 6 months. The mountain does not care about product cycles.
Product cycles care about the mountain. People like to speak of the digital as if it had slipped the earth. Cloud, virtual, weightless, everywhere. The language is a courtesy the furnace does not extend. Every abstract service still begins as a crystal pulled from a liquid in a glass cup. And that cup still begins as a powder whose cleanliness was decided in the Paleozoic. Spruce pine is not a government. It is not a cabal. It is a place where private firms and a unique rock produce a fact the rest of the stack must live with. Purity at this level is not a policy and not a software patch. The channel's promise was never that someone in a suit secretly runs the world. It is that familiar life, phones, clinics, markets, flights, rests on decisions and objects most maps omit. A specification sheet in Antwerp, a leach tank in Mitchell County, a Crucible serial number in Japan, a boule that either yields or is scrap. Those are the hidden systems that matter here, not a cartoon of control. The aftertaste is physical. You can nationalize a foundry. You cannot nationalize a lattice. You can train more process engineers. You cannot train a pegmatite to appear in a more convenient county.
Wealth in this century talks as if scarcity had moved into code and talent. Then a flood takes a bridge, and the talent waits on a mineral. Stand on the overlook above the Tow River, and the town looks ordinary. Churches, a hardware store, a high school, trucks. That ordinariness is the point. The most advanced machines on Earth are downstream of a pit that will never trend on its own. The haunting is not collapse tomorrow. The haunting is dependence that cannot be diversified by wish, by subsidy, or by a better slide deck. If the next washout lasts a season, or the next bench assays wrong, who exactly is in charge of the world's clean sand?